What's up everybody, Matt Maran here for another car review. This is the 2023 Honda HRV. So about the all-new HRV, well, here in its second generation, it's grown a lot, as well as having a ton of great improvements under the skin as well. But as far as the styling goes, I think it looks really nice and sharp. You know, it's got some Civic inspiration there in the front end, but I really like the distinctive nose you have on it now, and the longer hood here, which really gives it a sportier look, in addition to having the more swoopier back end now that kind of gives you a fastback-like profile. And so it all just looks a lot more exciting, I think, compared to the old, previous generation HRV. But as far as the size changes, that is one of the biggest things. So it's now 9.4 inches longer on a 1.7 inch longer wheelbase. So way longer than the old vehicle, which was, very squared off and boxy and short in the back there. This has, a lot more in the back end there now. And on top of that, it's 2.6 inches wider, and the track is also wider by about the same width. So should help you with handling, but also, again, give you a little bit more space on the inside. And it's also 0.2 inches taller as well. So barely any taller. So, I mean, it just gives you a very interesting look here, because I think, in addition to the long hood, you have these very lean proportions with a lower window line here, and just the way everything, even the hood line and everything, is a lot lower. And so it actually gives this, definitely a sportier vibe compared to the previous generation. And so anyway, one of the great things up front here is that you have standard LED headlights across the board now. So no matter whether you go for a base model or a top trim, you have the same great, excellent nighttime visibility, which is really nice that they have that. You also will get unique grills depending on which trim you are in. So this is an EXL, so it's the top trim. So you have the glossy black grille there up front. If you get a sport trim, it's a little bit of a different grille design, and then you get less of a glossy black whenever you go for a base trim. So, all of them look really good and pretty similar, honestly, but, it really looks nice. And you also have some other glossy black parts here on the EXL on the lower part of the front bumper there, with a little bit of an integrated vent that actually is functional and does vent out here in front of the front wheels. And so nice to have a little bit of functionality and a little bit of aerodynamic improvement there with that up front. And coming down to the sides here, you have 17-inch wheels here on the EXL. They get this unique gunmetal color, but they're essentially the same design as the base wheels, actually. If you go for the sport trim, which is the mid-grade trim, that actually gets you 18-inch wheels with slightly wider rubber, so that'll be the better handling one, and also the one that might have a slightly firmer ride. Otherwise, going out towards the back there, you'll again see that sloped roof line there, and more curvature to the back end on the hatch and all that. And I think it looks really nice. I also really like the detailing you have there in the taillights, the little dots, and I also like how they've hidden the exhaust tips. Kind of gives it a very clean look out back there as well. You also have a nicely integrated little roof spoiler there, which is standard across the board. And so overall, I think that it's just a very nice look and a really great improvement over the old HRV. All right, so let's start up and go for a drive. The HRV here has Honda's new key, which is so nice. It's really small and compact, just a few buttons there on it, but it's also got a nice weight to it. Doesn't feel cheap or anything, and just is a really nice little key, even a little bit of metal here on the bottom. Overall, I love this key, one of the smallest in the industry, and to me that makes it one of the best in the industry. And so really well done with this new Honda key. But of course, it is keyless access, keyless entry, and push button start here. So you just leave the key in your pocket, hit the engine start button, and it starts right up. And if you're curious to hear about the interior in the HRV, my wife and I just did a full in-depth interior review on this vehicle, so I'll link that above. You can go watch that if you want to hear all our thoughts on this interior. But overall, it is an enormous improvement over the old HRV, which was certainly feeling dated. And this is really fresh and just looks so nice. And it's also just really high quality feeling. Lots of padded surfaces, lots of nice materials, and just feels so nice. And honestly, I think it's probably one of the best in its segment. But definitely check out that video for all the details on this interior. All right, so setting off here in the new HRV. So the first thing you notice about it here, well, you still have a nice and pretty high seating position for a subcompact crossover like this. But actually, according to the numbers, the seating position is a tiny bit lower than the old HRV. But that doesn't mean you have worse visibility or anything, because they lowered that belt line again with the larger windows and lowering the window sills, and the front hood is a little bit lower and everything, and you have nice thin A-pillars. So visibility is excellent looking forward. You still feel like you're sitting up higher than a Civic or something for sure. And so you still have that crossover type seating position, so don't be worried too much about that. But yeah, and view out of the back is also really good and typical crossover fashion. And so overall, a very easy vehicle to drive. Of course, you do have a standard backup camera, and you have all the safety systems as standard too, meaning you have automatic emergency braking, you have your blind spot monitoring, all that kind of stuff. And so all that helps you out with driving. But this is a nice small car still, so very easy to maneuver and all that. Another thing that makes maneuvering nice and easy crazy is the steering, which has this nice light weight to it, but it to me feels really perfect for this segment. It still has a little bit of a substantial feel to it, so it's maybe a tad bit heavier than some competitors, but it's certainly lighter than the Civic, I'm noticing, which is surprising considering the steering is actually from the Civic, at least the mechanical components, but obviously the tuning and stuff is unique. But it just feels really nice and responsive. The brakes also are nice and predictable, easy to modulate smoothly, and they just feel really great. And throttle response here also is nice and responsive. This is running a CVT automatic transmission, so there aren't any real gears, but it's pretty responsive, and the way they've tuned it, it makes it feel that you're never waiting. It's never too slushy. It pretends to have some simulated shifts so that it kind of gives you a familiar experience, but it's still, if you know what to look for with CVTs, you will certainly be able to tell this is a CVT the first time you do an acceleration in this vehicle. A lot of people have been saying this is like the same platform as a Civic, and it does share some components with a Civic, but it's on its own unique platform. And it actually shares more components as far as the platform goes with the current generation CRV here. And so like the rear subframe and rear suspension and stuff is from the CRV. Some of the front suspension components are from the Civic, and then you have again some unique stuff for the HRV, but it's a blend of all of these three vehicles really coming together to create this new HRV. And so I mean, it gives you a really nice refined ride, nice and smooth here, especially on these 17-inch wheels, and pretty quiet in here too. They say that the interior noise levels are the same as the current generation CRV as well, so that certainly elevates this over the old HRV and makes it feel a lot more refined too. But we do have a couple of drive modes here for the HRV, but the only drive modes you have are normal, econ, and snow mode. But then there is also still this old school kind of setup with the shifter where you have an S and a L mode. I guess low, low gearing is the L, and then S is the sport mode, but it doesn't say it's sport mode on the gauge cluster or anything. But we'll go ahead and put the gear shifter into that S mode, and let's turn down onto this back road here and see how it does. And here we go. There, it's showing its CVT tendencies a little bit. It's okay. It's not anything exciting. It's very leisurely acceleration. I wouldn't have the most confidence stepping out and pulling out in front of someone in traffic or merging in this vehicle, but it is par for the course in this segment. So it runs a 2-liter naturally aspirated 4-cylinder engine, the same one from the base Civics, and it does 158 horsepower, 138 pound-feet of torque, which is 17 more horsepower than the old HRV and 11 more pound-feet of torque, but still 0 to 60 time is probably going to be around 10 seconds. The old car was 10.4 seconds. This is a little bit heavier, but also a little bit more power, so maybe you'll be, something, around 10 seconds even. So it is what it is. That's what you get in this segment. Really, the only punchy stuff in this segment is the Mazda CX-30. That is 186 horsepower, and that also has a turbo version with 250 horsepower, 320 pound-feet of torque. That's the hot rod of the group by a long shot if you're wanting actual performance in this segment. The Hyundai Kona also has a turbo option that feels nice and punchy, and even like the Subaru Crosstrek though offers a version with about 185 horsepower. So there are some punchier options out there, but this isn't the lowest either. There are some lesser powered vehicles in this segment as well. So I'd say it's on the lower end of the spectrum as far as the performance goes for acceleration. But for around town driving, if you're not someone who needs something sporty, this is going to be totally sufficient for driving around town. And so far, it doesn't feel like it's working too hard. A sport mode here maybe holds onto the revs a little bit longer, but it doesn't really change much. So we'll just go ahead and pop that back into the drive mode here and let it kind of relax. But this road that we're on here currently has this rough portion that usually generates a lot of road noise, and for a subcompact crossover, this is really towards the top of the pack. It's really much quieter than I was expecting, honestly, for this segment. And yeah, I mean, I'd say, it's right up there probably with the CX-30 once again. Might even be a little bit better than the CX-30 with the interior noise here. It feels really, really nice. But we're coming up some corners here that I always take, and let's see how the HRV handles. I'm not expecting anything sports car-like here, but, considering you have some Civic underpinnings, and, it is nice and light, too. These only weigh 3,333 pounds, fully loaded like this EXL with the all-wheel drive. And so the handling, again, the 17s certainly don't help. The 18s on the Sport would be my pick as far as, if you want something sporty. But, it handles itself really well. It actually is really nice and flat. Tires gave me a little bit of a protest there, and you can hear my stuff flying around in the back. But, it actually does a really good job. I kind of wish there was maybe a little more feeling in the steering whenever I was doing some cornering. It doesn't really load up very much. It just kind of feels a little disconnected, but it still was better than, again, most vehicles in this segment. And so, I still really love the weighting of the steering regardless. One huge improvement, though, with the HRVs here for these new ones is you have a multi-link independent rear suspension. The old one used to have a torsion beam rear suspension, so a lot more sophisticated here, should give you better handling for sure. Now, I have not driven the old HRV, so I can't directly compare it with that vehicle. I'd say that this certainly handles a little bit better than a Corolla Cross, for example, and feels really good. Might not handle quite as good as something like a Subaru Crosstrek or the Mazda CX-30 once again, but still really good handling nonetheless, in my opinion, and I don't think, again, anyone in this segment is going to really complain about that. Also, this one does have the all-wheel drive, which is a $1,500 option on any trim, and the all-wheel drive system is improved. One of the great things about it is it is a mechanical all-wheel drive system, which is something not all the competitors offer. A lot of them do, but it's just nice that it is a true all-wheel drive system with a mechanical connection, and they said it's been improved, so it's quicker to react now, and it also sends more power rearward. And they say if you're starting on a hill, for example, or detects that you're on snow, it will actually immediately send power rearward whenever you're starting from a stop to automatically kind of help you out so you don't have a bunch of front wheel spin. So it seems like it's a really solid all-wheel drive system. They really focused on snow performance specifically. So if you are someone who's gonna have some rough weather where you are, I would certainly recommend this all-wheel drive system for sure. Front-wheel drive you can get by just fine, in most cases, but if you're someone who wants the security of all-wheel drive, just know this is a very good all-wheel drive system, it seems. But unfortunately, I don't have obviously any opportunity to test it out here in the middle of July. And now we're hitting some potholes and little undulations in the road here, and it soaks them up very well. The 17-inch wheels, I think, really certainly help. You have pretty good size sidewalls on these tires, and just a nice soft ride. I think Honda still, very importantly, kept to the focus of, the people buying this vehicle and how they, aren't going to want anything super sporty. And I think for the buyer of this vehicle, it's going to be nice and comfortable and be a really great little commuter. And I think that's, what people are going to really appreciate is just the nice smooth ride, the fact that it's nice and quiet in here. It's nice and easy to drive, nice light steering, just comfortable in every way, and I think they just really perfected the comfort of the HRV here very well. And now I'm out on the highway here in the HRV, and I have the adaptive cruise control system on with the lane keep assist and the traffic jam assist that it has, and it does a really good job. Honda has consistently been doing one of the best adaptive cruise control systems as far as the lane keeping functionality goes, at least as far as hands-on systems are concerned. I think it's one of the best. It does a really good job, and one thing that's great is it's standard across the board on all trims of the HRV here for 2023, and so that means that regardless of how much you spend on an HRV, you're going to have the same great safety equipment and the same great, really luxury features of having adaptive cruise, which was a very high-end feature just a few years ago, and so it works really well here so far. I will continue to test it here during my week with the HRV, but a few of the improvements they did make to the system is that now the camera has a wider field of view for the forward-facing camera here, and so that means it'll be able to detect cars quicker and be able to react faster, to any kind of emergency situations, but it also means, it can do more confident steering around corners. It still is, of course, a hands-on system, but, just hovering my hands on the wheel here, letting it do the steering for me, it's very confident. A lot of other cars still pogo, or I can't trust them completely. Honda systems are one where I can actually relax, and I can trust that it's actually going to provide me with reliable assistance, which is actually a little bit harder to come by these days than you might expect. A lot of companies claim to have, really great hands-on, systems here with the steering, but very few do it very well like Honda does, in my opinion. And has a bunch of other improvements like the traffic jam assist thing with the low-speed control and the low-speed follow. That is a new addition here for these new HRVs, and so it's great that it has all that as well. On top of that, Honda also focuses on the actual crash safety as well, which is something a lot of other car companies these days don't really like talking about, or just don't bother talking about, because it's all about the tech and all that stuff these days. But what happens if the tech fails? And Honda still focuses on all that other stuff. So in addition to the IIHS Top Safety Pick Plus award that this already has, it also has, new airbag designs, and they've added airbags. It previously had 6 airbags, now it has 10. So you now have front knee airbags, and you also have rear side airbags, in addition to the rear side curtain airbags and the front side curtain airbags, of course. And so, it's great. They've upped the airbag count, and they've also said that they've developed the structure so that it impacts better with larger vehicles. vehicles. So it will protect you better from larger vehicles, which is getting more and more important every day with America's obsession with pickup trucks and large vehicles. If you're someone who's in an HRV, obviously you're not in the largest vehicle out there, and so it's really good that they've developed this to still hold up very well even against larger vehicles, and still just gives you this very safe feeling to know that you have that really good engineering behind you, in addition to having all the great safety tech. But anyway, thanks to Honda here, I'm going to have the HRV for an entire week, so I'm going to drive around all over the place, and then I'll come back and give you guys my final real-world fuel economy, as well as my thoughts on the pricing and how it compares to its competition, and anything else I also noticed during my week of driving here. Alright, so I've been driving the 2023 HRV here for a week now, and I've put about 103 miles on it here in my week of driving, and it's a fine companion. It's slow, and everything in this segment for the most part is. So, the whole power discussion in this vehicle might be completely irrelevant for, most of the people shopping for these, but, it's just a vehicle that, going up hills and having this thing straining going up hills, it does it, but it just doesn't do it quickly, and so it's just something that I'm not used to, since most vehicles these days have so much power, you never have to really think about, like, oh, wow, I have to really put my foot down to go up a hill, but, this is one of those vehicles where, that kind of comes into the equation, but, whenever you're doing around town, city kind of driving, stuff like that, it's going to be fine. No worries whatsoever, but so I know there's been a lot of talk about the HRV feeling slow, and I certainly agree with that, but I think for most people in reality it's not going to be a big deal. And I really had no other observations honestly during the week. It's just a predictable, easy to drive little thing. No issues to complain about, or nothing else that really jumps out at me as being overly impressive either, though. But the last two things I do want to mention are my fuel economy and the pricing of this vehicle. And so fuel economy was a little bit of a surprise for me, because these are rated at 25 mpg in the city, 30 on the highway, and 27 combined for the all-wheel drive versions here. And this one being the EXL means you have a little bit extra weight and stuff. But in my driving here, which is again mostly around town, 35 mile per hour suburban cruising. It's not grueling stop and go traffic or inching up in traffic, and it's also very little highway driving as well. But I was still pretty underwhelmed, because I only ended up getting 22.5 mpg, and maybe we can bump it up to 23 for a little bit of the interior filming that I was doing. But still, even at 23 mpg, this is just, it's kind of low. In this segment, it's not awful, but this is even, the EPA ratings are a little bit lower than most of the other competitors, which will usually get up over 30 mpg, for the most part, at least on the highway for most of them. So the fact that this, is kind of an underperformer as far as fuel economy goes, and I'm also surprised because this motor, has no turbo on it. It's not very powerful, so, I would say, well, it's slow, but at least it gets good fuel economy. But in this case, it's slow and it doesn't get good fuel economy, honestly. For a tiny little subcompact to be struggling to even get 23 mpg, yeah, it's got all-wheel drive, but it's just, I don't know, I just was kind of disappointed in that fuel economy. In my driving, I typically do get, 1 to 2 mpg less than the city rating, so this falls in line with that. 23 is 2 less than 25, not, out of the ordinary, I suppose. I'm just so used to getting better fuel economy in other vehicles in this segment. And I also have to say, before I get into how this compares pricing-wise to its competitors, the one thing, especially if you're a Honda fan and you want good fuel economy, you have the Civics. The Civic, it's the same engine, it's the same interior, and in the Civic hatchback, you actually have 0.1 cubic feet more rear cargo space here than in the HRV. Same roomy back seat, you're just not sitting up as high, and as a result, you have a couple hundred pounds less weight in those Civics. But this Civics, whenever I had those, I had a manual transmission Sport Touring, which had the more powerful turbocharged engine with a manual. I was ripping through the gears, driving it hard. I was still getting like 28.5 mpg in that Civic Sport hatchback. And then whenever I had the regular Civic Touring sedan last year with the CVT, I was getting 32 mpg in the same kind of driving, same circumstances. 32, almost 10 mpg better than this. Just so, really with the HRV, I feel like you're paying the SUV tax here with, I want to sit up 3 inches higher, and as a result, you get 10 less mpg basically. It's just like crazy. And it's also, again, those vehicles had more power for the same money, by the way, I have to add. So you get more power in the Civics, and you get way better fuel economy for the same price, or even slightly less money. Yes, they don't have all-wheel drive, and if all-wheel drive is an absolute, must-have thing, fine. But, a lot of people can get around just fine in the snow with front-wheel drive and snow tires. But I get it. If you need to have all-wheel drive, just keep in mind you're going to be paying, a big penalty for that all-wheel drive capability. And the front-wheel drive version of the HRV, by the way, doesn't do much better. So you can't really blame it much on the all-wheel drive as far as the fuel economy goes. So that's really the biggest letdown for me, honestly, and especially if you love this Honda interior, you love Honda's setup with the ergonomics and the driving dynamics, go for a Civic. All day, every day, just go for a Civic, and I think you'll be fine unless you're really trying to trek through some intense snow or something. So yes, but moving on to the pricing and how it compares to its competitors. So this one, as tested, is $30,590 for this fully loaded EXL with the premium paints and all that stuff. Now, pricing wise, that's actually pretty competitive with most of the others out there. Most of the others out there, though, for their top trims do give you a power rear tailgate. This does not have a power rear tailgate. It's still manual with that. But aside from that, basically comparably equipped, most of the competitors out there are going to be at least this expensive. Some of them are $32,000. Some even go up to like $33,000, depending on, again, it's not an exact comparison because some of them have like a better stereo, for example, and a few other things. But, so this is kind of a little bit on the low end, so, that kind of excuses the lack of power compared to a lot of the competitors. But it is worth noting, when you go up to the top competitors and their top trims, most of them will give you more power. So, I look at like a Mazda CX-30. That's my favorite subcompact in this segment. It has better driving dynamics. The interior is just as luxurious as it is here in this, and you have 186 horsepower. It feels way punchier than this does. And those, go for right around between like 31 and 33, depending on whether or not you want those extra top features or not. But, very comparable pricing here to this. And, one that I really do like, as long as you can live with the fact that Mazda forces you to use a controller wheel. There's no touchscreen on the CX-30, which is annoying, and I could totally see justifying this over that just for the touchscreen alone. But just keep that in mind. But otherwise, the Mazda, I think, is probably going to be a little bit better buy just because you have more power, and you actually sit up a little bit higher in the Mazda 2, I think. But then moving on to the other competitors, I think the Subaru Crosstrek is also another very strong competitor because in its limited trim, again, competing with this top trim, those actually give you about 182 horsepower, so almost as punchy as the CX-30 there. Again, way more than the 158 horsepower this has. And I prefer the CVT tuning in this versus the Subaru, but the Subaru, if you're dealing with CVTs anyway, the Subaru is not much worse than this. The Subaru just feels a little punchier. You have a little bit more room, I think, in the Crosstrek, and you sit up a little bit higher. Those have an easy touchscreen as well, and you have way more ground clearance. So if you actually are serious about driving through terrible weather or going off-roading or doing any kind of outdoorsy stuff in your subcompact crossover, the Crosstrek's going to be definitely the way to go. And so that's just, another very strong competitor in this segment. Beyond that, you have like the Hyundai Kona and the Kia Seltos. Those are right around this pricing. The Kona, actually, since it's towards the end of its life, is actually about $1,000 or maybe a little bit less than $1,000 less than this. And it's worth noting the Kona gives you fully digital gauges, which you don't get here in this. It also gives you a 10-inch touchscreen instead of the 9-inch screen you get here in this as well, but you don't get the wireless smartphone integration like you have here in this. So there's some trade-offs there. The Hyundai also has a longer warranty for what that's worth, but the Kona is going to be a little bit tighter, and it feels a lot less expensive than this does inside, with less padding and just a little bit of a cheaper feel. But that also gives 195 horsepower, even more than the CX-30, and again, for the same or slightly less money. So just another one to keep in mind there. Seltos is a little bit bigger than the Kona. That has a little bit less horsepower. It's 175 out of that turbo engine in that vehicle, but again, more punchy than this still. But the nice thing with the Seltos and with the Kona is that they have regular 7-speed automatics in those turbo trims. It's a dual clutch automatic, actually, so you don't have to worry about the CVT, kind of whining sounds here from the engine like you get with a lot of the other competitors. So that is one nice thing that the Kona and the Seltos have going for it. But the CX-30 does have a real normal torque converter automatic that's also superior to all the other vehicles in the segment. Even though it's only a 6-speed auto, it just has the most normal feeling driving experience. And so another reason why the CX-30 just feels a little bit nicer to drive, I think, still. And while there are probably another dozen competitors I could go through, the one last one I do want to mention that I think is a pretty close competitor to this is the Toyota Corolla Cross. So the Corolla Cross also has a similar amount of interior space. Now it's worth noting though, the Corolla Cross, even though the interior is fairly nice for this segment, it is certainly still less expensive feeling than this. It feels a little cheaper in the Corolla Cross. The driving experience in the Corolla Cross also feels a little cheaper. It's less well insulated, so you hear more road noise. It just feels a little chintzier in the Corolla Cross compared to this. This feels a lot more solid and again, more expensive than the Corolla Cross, even though the Corolla Cross is actually a little bit more expensive than this. Those come in around $32,000 comparably equipped. Again, they do also have a power tailgate like you don't get here in this, and they also have like a JBL stereo, which is a branded stereo upgrade versus just the Honda stereo you have here in this. And they also, for 2023, do have wireless smartphone integration. So pretty similar as far as features go. And it is, also worth noting that the Corolla Cross has the same kind of setup where it has a CVT transmission, but you do in the Corolla Cross have a little bit more power. Once again, 169 horsepower on that one, and a little bit better fuel economy as well. So punchier and more fuel economy. So another strong competitor that maybe for that extra $1,500 or so, it might be worth going forward for the better fuel economy and for the extra little bit of a punch there with that as well. So I think those are the strongest competitors. This segment is one of the hottest segments out there. Everyone wants to put their best foot forward here, and there's a lot of people competing in this segment. But I think that the HRV does stand out, especially again, you sit down in one of these things, the first time you sit down in it, you'll really be blown away. Definitely check out the interior review where we go into more detail on this interior. But I think that the interior is going to really sell a lot of people in this, and I think just the Honda ergonomics, the Honda driving position and driving dynamics will really sell people. But I think if Honda wants to make this even more competitive, just throw in the turbo motor that you get in the Sport Touring and the regular Civic Touring, sedan and hatchback. I mean, that would give you the punch that this is lacking and give you maybe even a little bit better fuel economy. We'd have to see. But, I think that would definitely be a welcome improvement here to this. But I know that a lot of people in the segment don't really care that much about power, but just to be competitive, it would be nice to have, more power and try and work out the fuel economy to be a little bit better. But aside from that, otherwise it's a very nice thing to drive. And I do have to say that despite the lack of power and despite the disappointing fuel economy, I still think this is probably one of my favorites in this segment. So if you can live with those things, I would say that this is certainly just one that I really enjoy driving for the week. Just from a refinement standpoint, how nice and quiet it is, how comfortable it is. It really is a class above some of the others, especially, some of even the newest stuff like the Corolla Cross. Anyway, that's all of my thoughts here on the HRV. Let me know your thoughts on it in the comments below. Huge thanks to Honda for providing me here at the HRV to review for you guys today. Yeah, thank you all very much for watching. I'll see you on the next one. Take care.